Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Next Dev FM. My name is Ryan Vogel, and I'm joined by my co-host here,
Dan Goosewin.
Dan. It's great to have another Next Dev episode, but I was reviewing the Next Dev repository, and did you push another vibe coded PR?
That's all we do nowadays. That's what the job is.
I guess so, but well, I'm glad that we had Code Rabbit. Do you know what Code Rabbit is, Dan?
Oh, never heard. Tell me more.
Really, really. So I'm glad we have Code Rabbit, especially as channel sponsor, but also in the repository because it caught that you were leaking all of our environment variables
Oh
directly in that
no.
PR. Well, I guess
Oh
not you. I
no.
guess whatever vibe coded agent you were using. But thankfully, Code Rabbit caught it and suggested a fix to do it all inline in the PR. So yeah, thanks to Code Rabbit for catching that issue. And Dan, no more vibe coded slop. Okay. Not
Ah,
until next episode, at least.
all right, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you to Code Rabbit for sponsoring all live next devs. Let's go ahead and bring forward our guest, Kyle. Let's rearrange theirs. Heck, there we go. Kyle, how you doing today?
Doing good. Thanks, Ryan.
Of course, of course. So, Kyle, thank you for coming to Next Dev. Let's get all of our guests up to speed by having you give us a quick 2-minute intro of who you are and who you came from, and then we'll dive into that more.
Well, I'm Kyle. Currently a co-founder CEO as of 6 months ago of a new startup. Ironically, Vibe Coding. Given your introduction, Bitrig is an iPhone app that makes iPhone apps. Me and my co-founders are longtime Apple veterans, and we're the creators of Swift UI, and so we're doing the whole build an iPhone app the native way, which is a little bit unique in the kind of vibe coding realm. And then where I came from Los Altos in the heart of Silicon Valley, same as Steve Jobs. Tough compare. Yeah, I know. And I kind of lived here actually my whole life, and then I joined Apple out of college and been working there since or until April.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Beautiful.
That's it's quite the journey right there.
Yeah, a whole
Yeah.
15 miles basically.
Yeah, I think you're probably the best suited vibe coded app to make an app inside of an app, especially since you you and your co-founder created Swift UI, which will be fun to jump into. Wow, so let's jump into and go back to the beginning. Get out of college and you join Apple. How was that?
Yeah, so ironically, growing up in Silicon Valley, they didn't have a programming class in my high school, which is quite the oversight. And so I didn't learn to program until college. And I learned to program, I entered college in like 2006, I know. And I took my first programming course and I was like, whoa, enough of that econ stuff. I want to do this thing. I was already a big like Apple fan. I actually worked at the Apple store out of high school, downtown in downtown Palo Alto, the university one. It's still there, which was cool. And so I immediately wanted to start building things for myself. And I took a class about how to build apps for your Mac in like 2007 or something, like 2008. And at the end of that class is when they announced the iPhone SDK was coming out. And I said, oh, this is going to be cool. And I was looking for internships that summer, and I found an internship on the kind of internal job posting site for the university. And I worked at a startup in downtown Palo Alto called Tapulous. It was really cool. They had this awesome strategy where they basically went and found the most popular jailbreak apps on the App Store, and they hired all those guys. And they said, let's make these for the real App Store, not the jailbreak App Store. And so they had this kind of like all-star team of these indie Mac developers that had been building these jailbreak iPhone apps. And so I worked there over the summer, and I made this very ambitious fortune cookie app, and I shipped that onto the App Store. That's back when compared to like the beer drinking, this was like serious utility. You could like tap it and get a fortune. And so that was, I think, my sophomore year internship, and I was hooked. This stuff was super fun. I did an internship the next year at Yahoo and helped build the inaugural fantasy football iPhone app. I was a huge fantasy sports nerd at the time, and so that was an amazing opportunity. But throughout my career, I've always wanted to really like learn from the best, learn from the experts. And so getting so into this technology stack, I knew I had to go and work at Apple and learn from those guys over there. And so I got my final internship on the communication applications team. FaceTime had just come out that summer, and I started, and I had no cell service in my apartment. And I had this FaceTime app, which is great, but I didn't always want to make video calls. So my internship project was to turn off the video camera in the FaceTime app, which you could also call FaceTime audio. So that was a cool internship project. And then I joined that team full time, and I worked on messages for the launch of iMessage, and continued working on it for another 4 years.
Wow. Wait, so you were behind FaceTime audio? Like was that internship project ship like the thing that eventually led into production, or was it like the Kickstart like idea?
What I'd say my contribution was not that significant. It was a cool internship project. And what I think was significant about my internship project is I demoed it to like the iOS leadership. So I demoed it to Henri Leroux, who was the head of iPhone software engineering at the time. And what was really compelling about it is when you turned off the screen and you just talked, the audio quality was amazing. And so just the visceral experience of the really high quality audio, I think actually possibly like got it on the roadmap. So they definitely did not ship my code. But I do think I also got to demo it to Scott Forstall, and I think none of my contribution really, but the great audio came through, and people thought it was really viscerally compelling experience.
Yeah, and to clarify for the audience, this is over a decade ago. This is like 2010, right?
Yes, yeah, I think that might have been the summer of 2010. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is a very different landscape in the industry, and very different things were considered to be impressive at the time.
I mean, I think we were talking about this right before the show started, but like what was amazing then with the iPhone is it felt like there were all these like gold nuggets just lying around the floor. And you could just walk over a few steps and pick one up, and it would materially improve your life and other people's lives. And I haven't felt that way again until very recently with this AI stuff, where again, it doesn't take something incredibly technically sophisticated. You just plug in these amazing like superpowers we've all like been handed, and you can materially make your own life or a friend's life or someone's life better in a very like impactful way. And it hasn't felt like that again since kind of those like late 2000s in my experience. So I think it's a really unique time right now.
Yeah. And going back to the Fortune Cookie app, I saw on your LinkedIn profile it had 250,000 downloads. This is like a dream of an indie hacker nowadays. So yeah, this is pretty cool. And yeah, I remember the apps like on the first iPhone, and everybody had the beer app, right? You would tilt the phone playing with accelerometer.
Oh yeah, that was I was so cool in middle school. I was like,
yes.
Hey guys, whoa.
Very cool. But yeah, going back to your career track, you've spent a lot of time at Apple. It is just, you did an internship at a few places, and like, Apple, all right, I landed. This is my place. How the hell did you land there, and how the hell did you decide that this is the place where I'm going to be sticking?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I always had like an affinity for Apple products, like in middle school and high school. I loved watching the keynotes, like it was super cool. I was like building things for myself. And also I think I mentioned like, I want to learn from like the best. I want to learn from the experts. I do believe in expertise and that people have a lot to teach you. And so that kind of drew me to Apple. And then I stayed for a long time because every time I started getting like the itch to try something new, I just found like an amazing opportunity inside the company to work with other great people, to work on exciting projects. And I felt like more exciting projects than I could possibly work on if I left. And so I felt that way about messages in iMessage. Like, it's like so cool. Like all your friends are using the app. You see it on like billboards. Like you're right out of college, you're seeing it on billboards as you drive on the freeway. You see it on HBO and like in the TV shows you're watching. And so that's super, super rewarding. I got to work on like the grand redesign that happened in iOS 7 and like update the whole UI for that. And then when I was looking to kind of try something new, I saw like being inside the company, making strong relationships with people I respected. I saw kind of the writing on the wall for Swift UI. I saw this new programming language, Swift, had been released in 2013. And I knew like there's going to be this process of upgrading the SDK to use this new programming language. And the most exciting thing to me was going to be, what's the new UI framework going to be like, and who's going to get to work on that, and where is that going to come from? And being inside the company, I kind of saw the opportunity to work on that, an opportunity I wouldn't have had at all if I kind of was leaving Apple and going to another company. And so I do think, if you're deciding between we just did YC, and so as part of the summer 25 batch, and so I kind of understand both sides of the like do a startup, do a big company thing, but you can have a really large impact at a big company. Like the work you do has this amazing distribution platform at a place like Apple, and at Apple it's going to ship, and it's going to go out to all these people, and that's really that can be really fulfilling. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah. I think that's really important because that really depends on the type of large company, because other than Apple, you see like these interns and stuff like that go and work at these other big tech companies, or not even tech companies, just large companies in general. And it feels like you kind of get stuck in like that corporate ecosystem. But that's kind of similar to what I've heard from Apple. It's like even the interns that are just working on a project, they feel like their stuff and their contributions aren't just like, oh, it's an intern, whatever, we'll just put it on the backlog or something like that. It's like it's the sort of feedback that they get is like, hey, this is good, let's look into this. And have you seen like that's kind of was what your experience at Apple was, even though it was a larger company per se?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a lot of positive things to say about Apple. And, by the time I left, I was like, solid middle management. And so I'd been managing a lot of interns. And so I can, one of the things I really liked about Apple from the beginning is you get hired onto a specific team by the engineer. You get interviewed by that engineering team and that engineering manager, and you know what role you're going to get. And I think there are pros and cons to like the different kind of hiring strategies, the different kind of companies employ. But I liked knowing exactly the team I was going to be on and exactly the project I was going to be working on. And as a member of the team interviewing other people, like we were looking for very specific people with very specific interests. And so there's a certain like team candidate fit you can get with that approach. And so I don't think I can speak generically about like how internships across all of Apple work. But on like the Swift UI team and the Swift Standard Library team that I managed, like interns got the best projects, because we're all like the way the Apple cycle works is, you're ultimately shipping new hardware in the fall in general. And so everything leads up to that. And so the whole cycle works backwards from that. And so the summer there's WWDC, and then you're kind of fixing bugs as the full-time engineers. The interns have the luxury of not fixing bugs during that period of time. And the engineering teams, if they want to really deliver like next fall, they need to get a head start on that stuff. And so the way I always deployed interns on the SwiftUI team was, hey, these are, I think, the really important things for us to do next year. Can you start building next year's features now? And like, we'll kind of learn together about like where the rough spots are, and you'll get to kind of like push the boundary of what's possible, and we'll have kind of diffuse some landmines before the real pressure hits the engineering team to deliver on kind of the roadmap that's been committed to in the fall.
Yeah. Well, one thing is for certain with hiring practices at Apple is known for being incredibly selective. And from your perspective, what like is one common theme in how Apple identifies and grows and qualifies talent?
I do think Apple does a really good job growing talent. I don't know what it's like at other companies, but some people go to Apple and they just stay there. And it's not these are not resters investors. These are like some of the top talent at Apple has been there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Like people, I definitely went to Apple and I felt like I'd found my people. And there's this people come in with a certain like set of values. And so I think a lot of people come there and they find their people and they're killer engineers and they love the products and they just work on them for like their whole career and get to ship all of these cool things. And so I do think there's a strong culture of like hiring junior engineers and like mentoring them and then them becoming kind of the subsequent like leaders of the teams and the technologies at Apple. I think, I'm most familiar with the software engineering org, and in particular the tools and frameworks org, where I worked for like the last 10 years. And so, we do have a high bar. It's a very like competitive like position. And so, we probably hired a half dozen junior engineers over the past like few years while I was managing the SwiftUI team. And a lot of them were interns or they were interns on other teams that kind of we converted. And for a team like SwiftUI, I guess, because it's a very relatively like prominent technology, we were in the like lucky position of having some incredibly like qualified people applying to us. Like we have a lot of people who like have contributed to the Swift programming language. Like one of the members of the SwiftUI team who we hired as an intern had built like the variadic generics feature or a lot like tuple unpacking for the Swift programming language. And so, we always looked a lot at open source contributions to Swift as a way of identifying like really talented people for the Swift UI and Swift Center library teams. And I mean, I think that makes sense when you're in the developer tools org. I think if you're in the apps org, you'll probably come up with different heuristics for finding kind of like really talented people.
Right. So the focus on junior professionals and then growing them within the organization seems like it was the focus. Do you see this changing now that the software development is being commoditized and advancements in natural language processing make the entry bar easier in software?
I mean, right now I don't. And when I say see, I mean, I left Apple in April. That wasn't something I was thinking about, like changing then. And I know I see a lot of talk about it, but when I think myself about like hiring for Bitrig, that's not how we're thinking about it either. I guess my experience has been people can come in as a new grad right out of college and within a year or two become one of the like most valuable contributors on the team. And I don't think AI is going to change that. I think it's going to kind of accelerate the ability of the most talented people to come up to speed like even quicker. I'm generally an optimist, so maybe there's some dark side to it, but yeah, right now that's not how I see. That's not how I predict things playing out. Although I know a lot of people maybe think otherwise, and maybe people are hiring less junior people as we speak.
Yeah. So this kind of we'll go a little bit back because I'm sure people are going to have questions about this. You were you and your co-founder like the real creators of SwiftUI? Like you had the idea? Because like I feel like that's like a very large claim that you're kind of just slid under. You're like, yeah, so back when we created SwiftUI entirely and then we started hiring these people, I'm like, whoa, hold on. Elaborate a little bit more on that. Like how was that totally. Process? Because that's like SwiftUI is like very, very, very popular, if not one of the most popular iOS frameworks and programming languages like used today. How was that like experience?
Yeah, so I mentioned, so we zoom back. I'm on the messages team. I've been on the messages team for 4 years. It's, 2014, 2015. I'm thinking, Swift's come out, but it wasn't ABI stable yet. And so we weren't able to use it inside of Apple yet for the frameworks and things like that. I'm also thinking about trying something new. And I see one of the kind of like most talented managers on UIKit change roles, and he moved from managing UIKit to managing WatchKit. The Apple Watch had come out, and if you know WatchKit, you know that the first version of it was a very kind of like underpowered like UI framework. And so I'm thinking like, why would this guy go on WatchKit? That thing is so like, you know, like puny compared to UIKit. And I was like, oh, it's kind of puny compared to UIKit. Like maybe he's going to do something new. Like maybe it's going to use Swift. That would be cool. And so I go and reach out to him, and I'd worked with him as an engineer on messages, he being a manager on UIKit. And I'm like, are you going to do like a new Swift UI framework? And he's like, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, can I come and join? And so that's kind of what I was talking about. Like, you know, when you're at a company and you're looking for a change, if you kind of keep your eyes open, all these people are moving around, and you can spot unique opportunities. And then there's no way if I'm like someone not at Apple, I'm going to like know that happened and be able to approach this guy. And so, yeah, so I was kind of officially the first person hired onto like the Swift UI team before it was called Swift UI, when it was the WatchKit team in Apple Watch. And then Jacob had worked for Josh kind of on the UIKit team. And so he was kind of, I joined in like, you know, the spring. He joined really quickly afterwards in the summer. And so we were kind of the first two folks working on it full time. Yeah, I mean, definitely over the course of it, a lot more people worked on it. A lot more kind of critical contributions, but yeah, I think you know, Jake and I were kind of the first two engineers there working on it full time.
How big was the team working on Swift UI?
I shouldn't talk about specifics too much here. I think Apple considers that a little bit like private information. But what I'd say is the teams at Apple, my understanding is the teams at Apple are relatively small compared to like, you know, my understanding is like, you know, you go to a big app company like an Uber or a DoorDash or an Airbnb, and I don't know, these are generalities. My impression from like the wind is like, that's gonna be like 100 people or something like that. In general, the teams at Apple are like an order of magnitude smaller than that, including the UI framework teams. And it's one of the reasons why ultimately we left, which is just that there's a lot of pressure on those core teams like Swift UI and UIKit and Springboard. Like every year, all the most critical features, those teams are the bottleneck for those features. And so the way they spend their time is incredibly important to everyone at the company. And so I was really excited about this AI stuff. And it just, you know, for me and Jacob working in these kind of like core positions in the Swift UI team, it was not the right trade-off for Apple to have like people on this like hot path for shipping like the new redesign and support for like all these new features to be dabbling on the side with AI stuff or whatever. And so, yeah, that was kind of one of the reasons ultimately why we did decide if we were going to work on this, we kind of needed to leave the Swift UI team behind and kind of turn a new leaf.
Yeah. So once again, over a decade at Apple, and you just decide to leave. Like, and the itch had to be big enough so that you would consider it. Did you have like the combination of factors? Like you had a vision that, hey, advancements natural language processing, I was working on declarative UI framework. There's a combination here that has to happen. Or was it just like, it's time to move on. It's time to go on and build something new on my own. What led to your ultimate decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, reflecting, if I look back on my career, I never intended it, but there's probably like a 3 to 4 year internal clock, and something goes off in my brain, and it's like, oh, it's time to try something new. It's time to learn something new. And I'm not like, oh, it's been 4 years. It's time for Kyle to go find a new job. In fact, I felt really bad because I told my manager, like at my like yearly performance review, like, I'm loving this. I love working for you. I love the team. I'm going to be here. Like, you know, I'm really happy. I had no complaints. Things were great at Apple. And then very soon after that, I was like, hey, I'm leaving. So like, what happened? Cause like, objectively, that was his experience. And he's like, what the heck, Kyle? Like, where did that come from? And honestly, I mentioned how much on the critical path often you are at Apple. And so I was on the critical path for all these things. And I was like, I don't have time to play with this AI stuff. Like, I hear about all the AI stuff, but SwiftUI still needs all these features, and I'm working on widgets and live activities and all of these kind of new features that are being announced every year. And so Thanksgiving break is a really interesting time because Apple gives you the whole week off, which is always great. And that's when I kind of finally take my head out of the sand and play with like new technology. And so it was Thanksgiving break last year that I played with Cursor for the first time. And I was like, whoa, this is going to change everything. And I was like, whoa, I've totally missed it. Like, I'm so late. Like, how did I miss this? Like, this is going to change everything. And for me, right, what I personally found so rewarding about working on SwiftUI was it's the interface between the person building the app and like the technology stack. And that was a big part of the fun, was that there's the human ingredient, like you're building messages, you're building an app for humans to use. And with SwiftUI, it's like you're building a tool, a bicycle for the fun for these other people to use. And, after using Cursor, and projecting outwards, to me, it was pretty clear that, the most rapid, changes to the developer experience are going, I think previously for the previous decade, they were at the API level, right? It's like the whole UI stack goes from the imperative paradigm frameworks, jQuery and to React, and UIKit to SwiftUI. And that's where a lot of exciting innovation was happening at the API level for developers. And after using Cursor for only a couple days, it was pretty clear to me that so much exciting innovation is going to be happening at the tooling level. And that is maybe where the most rapid innovation is going to happen for the foreseeable future. And I was kind of hungry to work on that. And something just in my mind, flipped. One bit flipped, and I was like, all right, I got to leave.
Beautiful.
A bit rig flipped.
Exactly, yeah.
So you said that it was last Thanksgiving that you kind of got to play with this, and then you left shortly after that, right?
I actually waited till April and to leave. Golden handcuffs are a thing, and that was kind of the stock vesting date. It was also, I felt a lot of loyalty. I mentioned how much I enjoyed my job. I felt a lot of loyalty to my manager. I felt a lot of loyalty to the SwiftUI team. I'd hired almost every single person on the team, and I really appreciated them, and I didn't want to leave. It was a really challenging, or not challenging. Every year, the releases are a varying degree of stressful. And I think iOS, ambitious is the right word. iOS 26, whether you like it or not, the kind of designs, it was an incredibly ambitious undertaking. And so the team was under a lot of pressure to deliver. And I'm really proud of what they did. And I didn't want to just leave in the middle of it. And so I took the next 6 months to kind of try as much as I could to kind of not leave anyone drowning when I left. And so it was that. And also, these companies, they structure your compensation plans to try and get that outcome also.
And that, everyone, is an example of a good boss. A good boss does not just up and leave when he has a new idea. He makes sure that his team is cared for. But so you left April, but you just said that, and that was April of this year, right?
Yeah.
But then you also just said that you just got done with your YC summer batch. That is a quick turnaround. So when you left on a Friday, cranked out the MVP of BitRig on Saturday and Sunday, and then Monday you applied to YC.
Almost.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Almost. Not quite that fast. But we didn't all Jacob has his own story, and the timing, it not all this was kind of concurrent, but suffice to say, Jacob had also decided he was going to leave and try new things. And it took us some time to figure out, should we leave together? Should we do a startup, and what should we even work on? But by the time that we were about ready to leave, we had kind of decided okay, we should try this startup thing. And if we're ever going to do a startup, being able to found it like together, because we'd been working together for 10 years. It was amazing kind of collaborative relationship. Like if we didn't do it now, like as we're both leaving Apple with this kind of idea that really seems in our wheelhouse, I'm not sure we would ever do it. And so we kind of decided to do that. And so we had an idea, but it was definitely a sprint to get a basic MVP together in time to do the YC application. And but there's also one of the reasons why we did it. You know, we did not want to come out of Apple and just, you know, like fool around and have nothing to show for like 6 months. And so applying to YC was a very ambitious deadline that we set ourselves, and it helped us move fast. And then you get into YC and you're like, okay, well, the batch starts in like a month or something. And so we need to make as much progress as we can before the batch starts. And then the batch starts, and they kind of encourage you to set these aggressive like biweekly goals. And so you're kind of being like, you're setting these kind of ambitious goals on a kind of biweekly basis. And so it's one of the reasons why we did YC. You know, they call it an accelerator. And one of the tricks of management is that, you know, setting deadlines and holding yourself to deadlines actually can get you and your team working 20% harder and getting things done 20% faster. And so arbitrary deadlines that, you know, you can kind of fool yourself into sticking to and hold yourself accountable to, they can make a difference in terms of how fast you're moving.
Right. So you went through the YC batch. It's the demo day was like what, 3-4 weeks ago? Yeah, not too long ago.
Yeah, early September. I think first week of September.
Oh yeah, 3 weeks ago. Yeah. And I'm really, really curious. Like, it must have been quite a pace shift working at Apple to applying to YC to going through the YC batch. Like, tell us about the biggest mind shift that you had to go through and like reconfigure yourself for, because I imagine decade at Apple, it has to be quite a bit of hardwired logistics in there.
So that was one of the reasons why we did YC. You know, I mentioned, you know, I believe in expertise, and I went to Apple and I wanted to learn from kind of the best there. And when it's like, oh, we're gonna do this startup thing, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like, well, who's done the most of this kind of like inception to seed stage stuff? Like it's YC. Like, where am I gonna make sure I'm not making? Where can I avoid making mistakes that people would know better? Like, oh, it's YC. And yeah, I did suspect I would have some things hardwired in my brain that I needed to rewire, and I figured they would help me with that. I'm trying to come up with like the best example of that. I'm not sure I have a great example. Honestly, this is going to sound, I don't know if this is going to sound like pretentious or whatever, but like, I actually think Apple was great training for a startup. Like, it sounds very counterintuitive, but the way, like, you know, it works inside of Apple for some of these very high profile features is like, they call it a tent pole, and you have this like very strict kind of like schedule. And every week you meet with the tentpole sponsor, who is like a high level executive inside the company. And so they might be, they're maybe on like the staff of Craig Federighi, who's like the senior vice president of all of software engineering at Apple. And basically every week you're kind of like held accountable by this person, and you tell them like what you're going to get done the next week. And there's just like no excuses for anything. It's like there's this kind of concept of this DRI, this directly responsible individual. And you're like, all right, this is what we're getting done next week. And then like, if you don't get it done, it's like, well, like that was your fault. It's like, oh, but we needed this thing from this other team, and that's why we didn't get it done. Well, it's like, but didn't you know that last week? And like, isn't there a way you could have like worked around it or done something differently or stubbed it out? And so you're on this like very ruthless, like weekly cadence. And I think it gets you moving really fast, and it gets you thinking like very tactically about like where you're spending your time in these like very short increments of time. And so I'd say at least for the phase we were in going into YC, where like we're all kind of alluding to, we came out and very quickly went into YC. We still need to get the product like up so that at demo day, like we had a demo, and so that we had an app we could actually put on the App Store. And so for that kind of execution, I feel like Apple had actually trained us pretty well. I think the biggest thing it's not so much a rewiring, but just a learning experience, and that we're still going through is, distribution is something you get for free at Apple. You just build it, and the people come because of like the magic of Steve Jobs and the halo of all of that for so many years. And so that's the big thing we're having to learn. And so I wouldn't call that a rewiring, but I do think YC helped emphasize like just how significant that's going to be, and it helped kind of get those muscles, like get us to start exercising those muscles, and also a great community of other founders who are kind of like learning that at the same time. And so I think that's probably the best answer I have.
Yeah, and because from what I've heard from my buddies who have gone through YC, they kind of do that sort of like accountability holding thing where it's like when you meet with the partners, it's like, this is what you got to do, and it's kind of like rigorous. And I know a lot of like, especially like the normal like, oh, it's the college student that dropped out and is in YC and they've never been like held accountable for anything in their life. That's like where they learn a lot. But I feel like you excel in that, and it's your company's kind of inverse, where it's like all these college students, they have like the insane like views and Twitter distributions because they're going viral.
Yeah,
But
totally.
they don't know anything about like actually like managing a product. But you've kind of got like the opposite, where you're like, all right, I know how to manage this perfectly. We've got our roadmap set for the next 19 years. Now we just need to learn some distribution and go viral. So,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's totally true. And it was one of the most useful parts of doing YC for us, I think, because we met some really great teams that like helped taught me a lot about TikTok and user generated content and all the crazy stuff going on in there, and made some really helpful connections. And I was able to talk to like Blake Anderson from the Cal AI like app, and so like that was cool. Like I didn't know anything about that, and I kind of got to learn a lot of that from those guys, and they were really useful connections to make.
Right. What would you say is one biggest learning from the YCS 25 batch for you?
I think honestly, it was probably to like trust my instincts and myself, and then our founding team more. Because I think like we went in like, oh, like these are the experts, let's learn from the experts. But ultimately, no one knows your company like better than you do, and no one knows your technology better than you do. And I think like in the spirit of learning, we definitely burned some weeks trying to do the rewiring and trying to like, I don't know if growth hacking is the right word, but like try to like do things the YC way and really show a lot of traction. But in the end, it was actually this like our bread and butter that got us the early traction and helped us make like the product progress we needed to make. And I mean, I still think it's important to go in and like learn from people, but it was kind of ironic that at the end of it, my biggest takeaway was like, I should have had more confidence in myself, like, and my intuition from the beginning. And honestly, I think our partner was trying to tell us that the whole time.
Yeah, maybe that is the learning that you're supposed to extract out of this experience. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Conviction to a level of delusion is what usually propels great founders.
Hopefully not delusion, but yeah.
it's delusion entangled with confidence that makes it look like you know what you're doing, even if you're just running off completely a concept. So moving forward, obviously, AI is now a buzzword, but it's also been getting some like pretty big like upgrades recently. Even though it's like we're in like this AI bubble, if you really look at like the technical specs of like how much AI has improved over the year, I think we all live in such a present of like information flow where we're like, oh, AI hasn't changed like at all. But if we go like a year back, what was I think it was like GPT-4 Turbo was like the fastest model, if I recall. And if you compare that to like the new model that dropped today, Claude 4.5 Sonnet, it's like exponentially better in like terms of like coding ability. But then also, since this is a Bitrig is an iOS app, Apple on DubDub 25 released the Apple Foundation models for the new phones. I got an iPhone 17 Pro here, and I got the Foundation model running, and it's pretty fast. It's obvious. I don't think it's up to the par of like 4.5 Sonnet, but how does that sort of like revelation of like on-device AI sort of shape Bitrig's future?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot there to comment on beyond just like the explicit question. So I don't know if I'm recalling it correctly, but I think Bolt was kind of the first vibe coding tool to launch. I think at this point last year it had not even launched yet. I think it was October that it launched. So that's crazy, right? An entire product category that has had a massive traction and resonance with hundreds of millions of people didn't even exist a year ago. And I think, I think the like the models are what kind of unlocked that. But also just the product progress, I think, is also kind of wild. Yeah, I mean, I think Lovable hadn't really launched until like February, and now like they're just totally
it's been like
slaying
6
it right
months.
now. Yeah,
and it's what's really cool is I saw a post about this. Is the core product of like Bolt and Lovable, and I'll ask you what you think about those in a second, but the core product really hasn't changed. They've just been like swapping out the model providers in like the back end, and it's just getting better every time. It's like the best like return on investment type thing. It's like you build the app like 90%, and then you just got to swap out the LLM provider every month or so, and then your app just gets exponentially better, and you're like, guys, we've redesigned the entire platform. But
yeah, it's nice to be running with the wind at your back.
Exactly. Yeah. The hardest part of the work, I don't know. We'll see how you feel about the hardest part of the work, but the biggest improvements are just like, oh, they launched a new thing. All right, let's swap it out. Wow, the app's like 10 times better. But it's funny you mentioned Bolt, because Bolt and Lovable, if I recall, they can build iOS apps, but it's an Expo. It's not native. You, with Bitrig, it's native, if I understand it correctly. Why do you think that is going to be an advantage to users?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few answers here. First, kind of more on the career side of things. We did debate whether we should do native. Like, we're like, should we do React Native? Because when we were first talking about this, like, there weren't as many people building, focusing on building mobile apps. I think when we first started discussing it, like Bolt hadn't announced it. I don't think anyone was really doing mobile apps, and so that was kind of unique. And we were already thinking of like doing it on the phone for the phone, and definitely no one was doing that. And so we're like, well, we think this is going to be a really compelling experience and really like accessible experience to like, billions of phone users. Should we use like native or should we use React Native? And ultimately, I'm going to go and talk about all the reasons why native is better. But ultimately, the core decision for us was almost more of just a like identity decision and like what did we want to see in the world kind of decision. And we kind of decided like, look, no one else is going to do it the native way. And, are we really going to have like created Swift UI and done all this kind of stuff to push the native SDK forward for a decade only to abandon it? And I think we kind of decided, Dick and I have talked about this a lot and over the years. And like, when you think about like impact and like having an impact on the world, like how do you define impact? And the way we've kind of defined it to each other is impact is kind of like what happens only because you're the person doing it. Like, it's like, like baseball, like wins above replacement player. Like if you swap in the replacement Ryan, right? Like, is it going to be any different than like the real Ryan? And I think like the impact is when it's like, yeah, it's a huge difference because like real Ryan does it this way. And so for us, it was just kind of like, we're the only ones that are going to try it this way. And I think there's a good chance it's going to be massively successful and we're going to have these big advantages. But also, yeah, I mean, if it turns out React Native is the better way to do this, we probably weren't going to be the people to win at that game anyway. And so we definitely debated it a lot and we decided to kind of like, double down on what we'd been doing. But specifically, here's my hot take. I wonder what you guys think about this. My hot take is React Native was a great solution for humans in the early 2010s. You've got these imperative UI frameworks, and there's this massive existence proof with React that like declarative UI frameworks just make developers so much faster and write less buggy code. And you've got all these people that know JavaScript and then TypeScript who don't know Objective-C and C++ and Java and these things. And so it just makes mobile development so much more approachable to so many people. When you compare it to like Objective-C UI kit to like React Native in JavaScript or TypeScript. And I think you keep going for like, more years. And I think it's still really attractive if you've got a team of TypeScript developers and they already know TypeScript and they want to build mobile apps. And I definitely, think the quality of the output of React Native is higher than just a straight kind of like web hybrid app or like a Flutter app, even like no questions, because it's kind of using ultimately like kind of the native components. But I think where we're going, like, you don't have a TypeScript developer writing the TypeScript. They're going to be using Cursor to write the code, and Cursor can be just as good at writing Swift code and Kotlin code as it can be at writing TypeScript code. And so using React Native, just because the team already happens to know TypeScript, I think isn't going to be as important as it was, and a big value add as it was when React Native was created. That's one. Then yeah.
Well, let me comment on that really quick. I think what you said about React Native being a language or a framework for humans is really important, because you could have your React Native file could be like 20 times smaller, but the abstractions that happened on the code level are 20 times bigger. It's like you have this component, but you as the human need to know what that component does and drills down to. But when you have more of this like object-oriented stuff with like Swift or Objective-C, the LLM, since it's more verbose code, the LLM can kind of like get all that in its context. Because the LLM really doesn't care if it writes it in Go, Kotlin, Java, C++, or any language. It just knows how to get the business logic done. And the more verbose the end programming language is, I think that's going to be the way that programming language will win with LLMs. That's why like TypeScript is really popular, because it gives LLMs that sort of like visibility into like be able to, I'm looking for a word here, like reiterate on its like lint errors and type errors and stuff like that. It gives it that feedback loop. That's what I was looking for. It's like that instant feedback loop of saying, hey, this is wrong. And same with like those other typed languages and everything like that. But anyways, your second hot take, I'm interested to hear this.
Yeah. Well, so I think that's like point one. Point two is, for a minute when I was like, hey, there's this Swift thing and there's going to be a new UI framework, I thought like, should I try and do this like outside of Apple? Should I try and do this like as a startup? And that would have been a horrible idea. There was no way Apple was going to embrace like another UI framework as its like, flagship UI framework if it was invented outside of Apple. And in particular, especially given what I know now, what is it? I don't know. I think it must be a like very challenging job being on the React Native team, because I think like keeping up with the evolution of the native SDKs is very difficult. Inside of Apple, SwiftUI team and UIKit team, same hallway, people working on both code bases. It was still really challenging to keep the two in lockstep. It was like a full-time job to keep the two in lockstep as new features are coming out. And so my understanding, and I haven't used it the most, like personally, but my understanding is like, React Native has always kind of lagged behind the native SDK APIs. And like every year when the new OSs drop, there's like a whole new soup of APIs that are not integrated. And so I imagine just the gap between React Native and the native SDKs has only been growing over time since it was launched. And I don't think that's slowing down. And then you have the introduction of UI frameworks like Jetpack Compose and SwiftUI that are declarative from the beginning. And it's my understanding like React Native doesn't really have an answer for those. And you don't need a declarative like Shadow DOM for something that's already declarative. Like it's a completely different technology you would want in terms of if you just wanted a TypeScript shim that was on top of Android and on top of Jetpack Compose and SwiftUI. And so I think it also doesn't make sense for kind of like once you kind of take point one, it like there's this downside that there's always been of React Native having to keep up with the native SDKs and the shifting sands of those things. And if the benefits aren't as large, the negatives of that like maintenance burden, I think are very large. And, you know, if you want to make a widget on your home screen, if you want to make a live activity in the dynamic island on the phone, if you want to make an Apple Watch app, you can only do it with SwiftUI. And you can't do it with React Native. Like you can, as a professional programmer, you can write the SwiftUI and integrate it into your React Native app. But as a kind of like vibe coding tool for a non-professional developer, like the LM is going to have to write SwiftUI code for those things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if we're talking about producing the best user experience possible, SwiftUI is obviously the answer over React Native, right? And React Native is an excellent way for web developer who is very comfortable writing React to just go and ship a mobile app, right? That's the only reason why it exists and why it's great and why it's so widely adopted. While I agree with your point that yes, long-term, medium-term, SwiftUI is the way in that regard, language models are a function of its data corpus. And we do not have as much data available presenting the use of Swift effectively for building such applications. So how do you envision this changing, and in general, what has been your experience making LLMs produce Swift code?
Yeah, I'll have to admit, like I haven't done a very like thorough side by side of like TypeScript to Swift. I've definitely heard that from a lot of people, and I totally believe it to be true also. It's not hard from first principles to believe it to be true. Like there's just so much TypeScript code out there. I think for us, the kind of my first principles thing I put my faith in is just Apple has such a significant vested interest in LMs being good at writing its native language, Swift and Objective-C. Like, you know, we started this project to move the Apple SDKs over from Objective-C to Swift like over 10 years ago, and it's still ongoing. It's such a large human undertaking to do that. Like, I don't want to say anything like 100%, but just like it would be very hard to believe that Apple would be like, all right, it's time to move over to the language of the LLMs, and we're going to move everything over to TypeScript. Like, it's already taken us over a decade to like evolve things into Swift. It would take so long to do that. I think the much more practical route is the route through, which is just, I think it's in Apple's interest. I think it's in Anthropic's interest. I think it's in like a lot of people's interest to make these LMs just very good at like taking concepts they've learned from one language and applying them to other languages. And so it's a little bit of a kind of like leap of faith argument, but I feel like it's based on kind of like human incentives and like human energy. And I think, say, like rewriting the Apple SDK in TypeScript sounds to me to be such a long, large undertaking. It sounds almost more difficult than teaching the LMs to write Swift really well.
Right. And I can personally say, because I've built an Expo app and a Swift app via like vibe coding in a sense, and I had my use case, because I wanted to see which one would do it better, is I had Xcode with like a standard Swift UI project and Claude code running on top of it, like access to the workspace. And then I think I used like Expo inside of Cursor. And And it worked well with both, but I gotta say the feedback loop inside of Xcode was a lot higher because the Claude model, or Claude and Claude Code, could kind of reach into some of that stuff. But then Dan also said it's like, oh, there's not as much like Swift source code available for training. But recently, and I don't know how the data sharing properties work on this, but Xcode 26, I think, the newest one, now has that AI Apple Intelligence panel inside of it. And I got to assume that there's some sort of data sharing policies or something like that that may or may not be enabled or something like that. But if more developers are using AI natively inside of Xcode and all these other platforms, we're probably going to see the exponential growth of those languages and comprehension on the LLMs itself. So it's like they're infinitely going to get better. And there's a lot of open source apps and stuff like that on GitHub as well. So I think it's just going to be, because we are kind of running out of like, well, you're not going to be able to hit every single like private like code base and be like, hey, do you want to give us your code so we can train our LLMs? Yeah, no, we're not going to give you any money for it. It would just be for like the greater good, you know? I don't think that would be, but from my personal experience, it's been pretty nice experience. I kind of like 3-shot an app to deploy it to test flight for just my local phone. And I just had to like connect my database and all that other stuff. And it kind of just started working. And it's definitely best used for like personal software. It's like I've got like it's literally a simple finance app that just shows me like the 3 numbers. I don't need to make this like generally available for everyone, but it just works for my use case like perfectly. So I think it's definitely an interesting era to kind of see this all come out and like evolve with.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said, the kind of joy of building personal apps for yourself, like that's what got me hooked into programming in the first place. When we talk to Bitrig users, a lot of them have never programmed before, and they've had these ideas for apps, and Bitrig has just kind of like unleashed them to realize these things for the first time. And I think nothing is kind of, my personal experience was learning to program is incredibly empowering, and you start to see the world in a different way. You start to see like opportunities around every corner that software can solve. And I think one of the exciting things about the vibe coding space in general, these platforms, including Bitrig, is I think it's bringing this like empowerment and this excitement to like an order of magnitude more people. And they're kind of having all those like aha moments and like awesome feelings that I think us developers got to enjoy.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, we're coming to the end of the hour. So this is your, before we ask our final question, we'll give you your 1 minute of fame to be able to promote your product. And where can people find you and follow Bitrig and follow and support you?
Yeah, so like I said, Bitrig is an iPhone app that makes iPhone apps by chatting with AI. You can think about it as like Lovable for iPhone. It makes native Swift apps just the way kind of a professional iOS developer would write them, like we were talking about. You can actually build the app, test the app, and deploy it to the App Store all from the iPhone. We have a Mac app in private beta with our paid subscribers. Ultimately, my prediction is that, in 10 years, the majority of apps on the App Store are actually going to be built this way with these vibe coding tools, just because I think, you've got a couple million professional iOS developers out there, but I think there's going to be an order of magnitude more of these kind of like non-professional developers who are experts in their domain, who have great taste and who can make these really like productive things. We want to be the tool for people building those apps. And if you want to try out Bitrig, you can download on the App Store. It's spelled like it sounds, Bitrig. Bitrig app on Twitter. And yeah.
That was over a minute. We're going to have to bill you for every second of that. But final question. We asked this of all our guests. When did you join Apple? What year again?
Full-time 2011. Internship.
You could go 14 years back in time and give yourself one piece of advice. What would it be? So right when you're about to join Apple, joining Apple.
You know, I don't know if I actually have an answer to that. Like I've been reflecting a lot about like leaving Apple and doing YC and all these things, and I think I reflect on it and I think about what would 2010 Kyle think? Like what would Kyle as he's learned to program think? And I think that Kyle would think, "Whoa, that's super cool that you get to do that and get to work on that." And and that is also a heuristic I use for making decisions. Like if 2010 Kyle would think that new job sounds super cool, then current Kyle is like, well, let's do that then. So maybe the advice would be, don't forget how you feel now, and use and continue using that enthusiasm as kind of a North Star as you navigate your career.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's a good answer. It's the wrong answer. The correct answer is buy Bitcoin. But
I did try and mine a Bitcoin in 2010. I got this like brand new iMac like when I did my internship, and I was like, it was so powerful, and so I had it mining for like a day or two. I was like, you know what, this is going to use way more money in electricity than it's ever going to be worth, and I turned the thing off. Huge
That's
mistake.
Funny. Yeah. Would have been worth millions now if you just left it on for like a week and a half. Cost you like $400 in electricity back then, but yeah, no, that was definitely a good answer. I think more people, and it kind of shows kind of what you've reflected on from YC. It's like, trust your gut. If there's something out there that's calling you, there's probably a reason why it's calling you. So yeah, I think that's super valuable. But yeah, man, thanks for coming on. This was a great episode. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Ryan. Thanks, Dan.
Of course. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for tuning in this week for Next Dev. We will catch you later. See ya.
Cheers.